Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm sorry, I'm still trying to get my desk and everything organized and try to get uh my breakfast in there. So
I understand.
yeah. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Everything's going well.
Good, good, good.
Car. Just trying to get set up here.
Okay.
Too marvelous for words. Too wonderful for comprehension.
All right.
Nothing seen or heard.
My you know that wooden stand? It should be in there. The wooden stand and the blue stand. See?
All right, Veronica, can you see my iPad screen?
Um, no. I see it says you have started screen sharing. Double click to enter full screen mode. Am I supposed to double click? Oh, now I can see it. Okay.
Okay, there you go. All right. I've already covered part of Psalms 5 with the other group, Psalm 5. So
Uh-huh.
I'm putting that on the screen if you want it. We've already covered it. But if you want to get the background, the title, the key verse, the thought, the outline, it's there. Um, and you can just take a picture of it with your phone if I go too fast, and you
Okay.
transfer it later. Some people do that because we cover a lot, So, or I can make it available after hours, after class, and you can get it then if you miss something. But
Okay. So for the classes, this is the fifth or sixth class. This is the fifth class.
well, counting the ones at PTP, this will be the 10th class, 9 or 10, I think. But
Oh,
I think we've had 3 or 4 before. We had the introduction, Psalm 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6. So that'd be 1, 2, 3, 4. I think we've had 4 classes um, prior to
okay.
this. I'm not positive, but that's what I
Okay.
think.
Oh, I didn't get to take a picture. You took it
Oh,
down? I'm sorry.
I didn't mean to take it down. Let's see if I can see
Oh,
what
okay.
I think it might have.
So
Yeah.
does everybody mostly like mute them? I've never done a Zoom class like this before. So do everybody like mute themselves and
Should come back up now. Um, no, everybody stays on. They don't. I talk most because try to cover a lot, but at certain times everybody jumps in with comments, and
Okay.
so that mostly, get down what you want to get down as far as notes, and but the guys are good about making good comments that sometimes are they ask a question or add a comment that brings in another perspective, which is good. All right, let's see why that's not showing up. It's crazy. Maybe I got a bad connection here. Let's see if I can figure that out. Yeah, that's gonna be it. But this will be.
Recording in progress.
All right, should come back up and stay up now, I think.
Okay.
There we go. Maybe.
Now I'm not able to move the screen. You're moving it, right? Like,
Yeah,
are you going to the next one or
I'm
is it
just making some edits to this
gotcha?
screen right now.
Okay.
Waiting for everybody to join. They're probably in another class right now, so they'll join in a minute, or sometimes they just get there right on time, but they'll be there.
Oh, I see. Okay.
My handwriting's not the best, so I try to correct it so it's easier to follow. You don't have to try
Okay.
to spend a lot of time figuring out what that mark there means.
Rod and Victoria are here, and so he's doing his class this morning too.
Oh, is he? That's cool.
Mhm. Yeah, he's in the other room working on he's in class for heritage.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I just need to hold my Bible up. Thanks.
Eric Olis is Paul. Did you go to? Who was it? Who did the talk about canvas? Did you hear that one?
All right. Welcome to class. We're beginning, we're continuing a study of Psalm 5. In our last class, besides the ones at PTP, we were in the middle of Psalm 5. So I'm going to dive in. I will just cover very briefly the background to the Psalm just because it's been a couple of weeks for us. We're calling this Psalm the Smiling God. Key verse is 11. The key thought: let God hear your voice in the morning, because David let God hear his voice in the morning. That's a good practice to begin our day with prayer. And then there are two outlines there, but the key idea is the devout life. You have the inner aspect of the devout life in the first 7 verses, and then you have the outward aspect of a devout life in verses 8 through 12. So it's about being a dedicated believer in God, and it starts on the inside and then it's observable from the outside. So we are in this section now as we move back into our current study, the second part of the psalm. We are picking up at verse 7. So we're almost through that first section, that last verse of the inner side of the devout life, and then we'll go into that second half of the psalm. So let's pick up in verse 7. But as for me, I will come into thy house in the multitude of thy mercy, and in thy fear will I worship toward thy holy temple. First thing we'll notice there is that there are two representations of God in the verse. So I will come into thy house. So that's a reference to the temple or the tabernacle of God, the earthly place of worship. And then I will worship toward thy holy temple. That's a reference to heaven where God sits on his throne. So you have the earthly place of worship, and then you have the true place of God's dwelling in the latter part of the verse. So this verse is about worship. It's about going to worship. And I wrote a sermon here called Coming to God's House, which was in the Old Testament, of course, the tabernacle and later the temple. And in the New Testament, it is the meeting of the church in whatever community, building, or place where the church meets. But all these things are involved in coming to God's house. And they're all in the green color here. So let's just go through these briefly, and you can make a sermon out of them on your own. But these are some ideas to get you started first. But as for me, you see, that's personal. That's what we're talking about, the inner side of the devout life. As for me, I'm taking this personally. I will come. So that implies effort. I will come into thy house. He's going to leave his house. He's going to make the effort to go to the place where God's worshipers are. He's not going to be lazy or make excuses. And it's easy for us to do that. It's easy for people to say, well, I would go, but I don't feel really great, or I've got a lot to do, or somebody upset me last time I went, or, there's a lot of excuses we can make, but the focus should be on giving God what he deserves and recognizing that we will benefit from being with God's people in worship. I think a good rule of thumb, or one consideration about going to work, a couple of considerations. One, do I have something that's contagious, that's going to hurt someone else or cause them inconvenience or not to be able to do their work? So I think that's a matter of loving your neighbor as yourself. If you're contagious and you're going to give them something, then that's a good reason to stay away. A second thing is just judging my own desire to go. Would this same condition today keep me from going to work tomorrow, or from going to school tomorrow, or from going to a concert that I'd bought a ticket for, or a ball game? If the answer to those questions is no, I would still go, then certainly I ought to go to worship and I ought not use that for an excuse. So there's your first point. Second point is in this section, into thy house in the abundance or in the multitude of thy mercy. That's talking about how abundant the mercies of God are. It's abundant. It's not scarce. It's not infrequent. God gives much mercy every time I need it. So that word of multitude there, at first I applied that to the people that were going to the house of the Lord, and hopefully there would be a multitude of them as well. But it seems that he's talking about mercy here and not the people. So the abundance would be the key idea. And then you see the third point, purpose or result. Why is he going to the place of worship? Because he needs mercy. He's going because he wants to be right with God. So that is both his purpose for going and the result of going, because he leaves with something he didn't have before he came there. Now he has mercy that he received while he was there. Number 4, you have the condition or the attitude of the worshiper. And in thy fear will I worship. So it's respect or awe of God that he brings into the place of worship. So the condition of the worshiper or the attitude of the worshiper is important. John 4:24 tells us that we're to worship in spirit and in truth. So this would be the spirit of worship. And then the next one is, will I worship? There's your activity. Worship is not passive, worship is active. And we may be passive physically because we sit in the same place, we're not walking around or doing any obvious physical activities, but our minds are engaged and we are active mentally. We're paying attention, we're focused. So there's the activity of worship, and then the intent of worship toward. This is not about what's happening in this room, it's about what I'm giving to one who is in heaven. Of course, God is everywhere, but toward the holy temple implies toward heaven. So that's verse 7. Now I'll back up and remind us of what we were doing with the brown color here. We are, as we often do in the Psalms, getting lessons from the chapter, lessons from Psalm 5, and they're all color coded with that brown color, of course. I'm not going to go back through these, but the video is archived if anybody wants to go back and catch up on those. But we'll pick up right in the middle with the next lesson from Psalm 5, and that is the decision to worship and serve must be made on the personal level, must be made on the personal level. Can you still hear me?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. I was trying to,
Yes.
I'm hearing echo here, so I'm trying to adjust my computer so I don't hear that. All right. The next lesson, and there are a couple of verses there, Matthew 6:33, Hebrews 10:25. The decision to worship must be made on the personal level. And I emphasize that with the two personal pronouns at the beginning of the verse. Now, the next lesson is the place to find mercy is the house of the Lord. He said, I went to worship where there is the abundance of thy mercy. So if I need mercy, I'm not going to find it in the psychologist's office or the psychiatrist's office or at a pill bottle or in alcohol, the bottom of an alcohol bottle, or some kind of chemical shot up or smoked into my system. There may be some benefit to a psychiatrist or psychologist, or there may be the need for medication. I'm not saying that those things are never a consideration, but I think a lot of hospital rooms would be empty if people just knew God loved them and forgave them. And a lot of psych wards might also be empty or emptier, and a lot of people would be able to function better because they need mercy, but they haven't found the right place to get it. So the place to get it is the house of the Lord. Become a Christian. Accept the promises of God, the blessings of God, and it will improve your mental health. Now, the next one is when under attack, what we need most is the wisdom to know the Lord's will. Now, I'm getting into verse 8 at this point, so watch this as we go through it. Watch for this lesson. And there are two in this verse, so I'll go ahead and give you the other one too, so you can watch for it. Do not let enemies or persecution turn you from righteousness. That's the devil's purpose. If he can't lure us away from God, then he'll try to drive us away from God with persecution. They're two different tactics, but the same goal is to separate us from God. Now, verse 8 says, lead me, O Lord, in thy righteousness, because of mine enemies. Make thy way straight before my face. You see that last part, make thy way? He's pleading with God to help him to know what way he should go. And what we really need more than anything else in life is God's will for us. You know, we may ask God for this and and want this, and that's fine. God wants us to pray as, according to what we desire, and he likes to give us what we desire as his children if it's within his will. But sometimes we don't know what we want, and we don't know what we need. So what we really want is what God wants for us. We want that more than anything else because he loves us more than we could love ourselves, and he has wisdom that we could never possess. So, God, what do you want me to have? Give me that. And in this case, I want to know the way I should go. Make it straight before my face so I can make the right choices that will determine where my destination is. Now, the other lesson, lead me, O Lord, in thy righteousness because of mine enemies. So that implies that he's feeling tempted or in danger following God, but he's saying, my enemies are after me, but I'm maintaining my focus. I'm going to maintain my way. I don't want this to cause me to fall or stray or turn away from serving. I also made a note here. It's not one of the lessons, but a note that goes with the phrase, thy righteousness. That's the only sphere where prayer is answered. If I am in the righteousness of God, God will hear my prayers. But if I'm not in the light, if I'm not in God's right, if I'm not right with God, then he's not going to hear my prayer. So that's the only sphere or area where God will answer prayers. It's when I'm in the will of God. Now, the next note is I highlighted the thy there. We always highlight God, every reference to God in the Psalms, and that's one of them. But I also highlighted it with a note. It says, make thy way straight before my face. Not my way, not man's way, but thy way. And then the last note is before thy face. That indicates both God's watch, like watching over us, protecting us, looking out for us, setting the table for us, and also his inspection. As I go through my day, I'm going to be engaged in activities. Some of them are right, some of them could be wrong. And so everything I do, though, is under the watchful eye of God, and I will give an account for it. Hebrews 4:13 says, all things are naked and open unto him with whom we have to do. So that would fit in that last phrase, last part of verse 8. Now, I'll give you a chance to talk in just a minute, but let me give you these 3 sermons over here on the side. We almost went too long without having a sermon, so I don't want to be disappointed in today's class. So we'll make sure you get your sermon, your Sunday sermon, especially since you've been gone all week. Of course, you haven't heard any sermons this week that you might want to preach, so you're probably looking for one, right?
That's right.
There's a million sermons that you've heard you say, I want to preach that. That church back home needs that, Yeah. Well, here are a couple, 3 sermons. The first one is based on that phrase, as for me. As for me. So a personal religion. Number 1, a personal religion involves worshiping God, verse 7. Personal religion involves beholding God's face. That is, in private. I'm not going to see God. I'm not going to experience God viscerally, but I am before God's face in faith, and I have a personal interaction with him in my devotional life. Number 2, a personal religion involves walking in integrity. I'm not a hypocrite. I'm not perfect, but I'm trying to be, and I'm not on purpose sinning. I may get caught up in weakness, ignorance, or error, or I may not know what I should do, or I may not have the courage to do it, but I want to do it. Number 4, personal religion involves concern for others. I'm not giving any of these references, but they're all in the Psalms, as you see there. Those verse references following these ideas, all from the Psalms, a personal religion. And then number 5, a personal religion involves being upheld by God. It helps me personally. And then the last one, a personal religion calls upon God. Hear me when I call, oh God. We sing that. That's based from this comes out of the Psalms. Now, here's another sermon that's similar, which is "As for me," which is also from verse 7. That involves the covenant, Genesis 17:4. That is the most famous verse that involves that phrase is Joshua 24:15. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So, as for me, we're going to serve God. As for me, personal prayer. That's Samuel's example in 1 Samuel 12:23. God forbid that I should sin in ceasing to pray for you. Then, number 4, making plans for God. That is, as for me, I'm going to plan to advance the cause of God, to serve God, to glorify God. And there are 3 passages in First Chronicles where that phrase is used in that way. And then number 5, as for me, my life is in God's hands, and I know that. And that's a good place to be. In fact, that's the safest place to be. I think you could also put there John 10:29. I think that verse mentions that we are in the hand of God. And then the last one, as for me, look to the Lord. Look to the Lord, Micah 7:7. So that's a textual sermon that just goes through the Bible and finds the same phrase or the same idea and builds a sermon that way. That's an effective way to build sermons, I think. And it brings together various passages that you might not see together otherwise. And some of them are similar, so you don't want to make separate points for them like those. They don't have to be in the same book to be listed, together like we did there. But a lot of times the idea is different, and so you can build your points that are all different, but using the same framework or the same theme throughout all of them. All right, let's look at one more. This is from verse 9, but since I'm here, I'll go ahead and give it to you. Verse 9 says, "For there is no faithfulness in their mouth. Their inward part is very wickedness. Their throat is an open sepulchre. They flatter with their tongue." So that mentions there's no faithfulness in their mouth. But the implication is there should be faithfulness in our mouths. So where else should faithfulness be found? Here are 3 points. I left room here because I know there will be others to add to this list, but this will get you started. And of course, 3 points is enough for a sermon. So faithfulness in our speech, that's right here where we are. In our worship, Hebrews 10:25, and you might remember this quote: we cannot educate if you vacate, right? So you're going to have to be there in order to worship with the saints. Yes, you can worship other places, but you can't worship with the saints unless you're where the saints are, and that's what Hebrews 10:25 says. And then number 3, faithfulness in relationships. Malachi 2:14-16 talks about breaking the marriage covenant. And we want to emphasize that in our culture, especially where there are so many opportunities and there's such a lax attitude toward that our people and others who hear our sermons that aren't yet Christians need to know about the importance of faithfulness. And our children growing up among us, they need to know when you marry, you're committing yourself to one person for life, and you've made a covenant with that person. You've made a covenant before God, never to violate that, and never to bring a reproach upon yourself, your family, and especially upon the name of God. So there's a sermon on faithfulness. Now let's go back into verse 9. For there is no faithfulness. I read it, so I won't read it again, but I will highlight the numbers here. You see 1, 2, 3. So there's no faithfulness. In their inward part is very wickedness. So no faithfulness, wickedness. Their throat is an open sepulchre. So that would involve their speech. The last 2 involve their speech. Open sepulchre would be like a sepulchre is a grave. So you follow their speech, you're going to end up in a grave. Maybe not physically, but spiritually speaking. And then they flatter with their tongue, so flattery. Now, back to these lessons based on Psalm 5. The next one is here about flattery. Flattery is not communication, it is manipulation. Flattery is not communication. I mean, it involves words. You're using sentences. So there is an aspect of it that is communication, but really it's manipulation because that's its purpose. I'm not being sincere. I'm saying something to get someone to like me or to trust me, and then I have an ulterior motive for that. And that, of course, pleasing God. There are a number of verses about flattery in the scriptures, or about sincerity, that are listed there. A number of them from the Proverbs. Proverbs has a lot about speech. So if you're preaching on the tongue, then you almost always want to use Proverbs because they state those truths memorably, a lot of times with parallelism or contrast, and sometimes with illustration like a metaphor, a simile. All right, now we'll move into, see, we got about 3 minutes before I'll take my breaks. Let's do verse 10. Let's go ahead and see if we can finish. I'm going to go fast. So let's go ahead and do the wicked tend to self-destruct. That's a lesson from verse 10. Destroy thou them, O God. The wicked tend to self-destruct. Let them fall by their own counsels. Cast them out in the multitude of their transgressions, for they have rebelled against thee. Notice the emphasis there. This is not a personal vendetta. This is a cry for God's name to be defended or to be honored. They've rebelled against thee, not they've rebelled against me. That's a key to understanding the imprecatory Psalms, which I'll give you that in just a minute. But let's go ahead and finish these verses. Another sermon based on Psalm 5 is, who gets a blessing? Well, I want to be in that line, don't you? I want to be in the line, who gets a blessing? So this passage, the next two verses, give us three people who are in line for blessings: those who put their trust in God, those who love God's name, and those who are righteous. Those are the ones who get the blessings from God. And that's straight out of the text. So you could preach that one expositorily or textually according to how you approach it or how you define those terms. All right, let me give you the imprecatory. That was something we talked about briefly in the introduction the other day. Imprecatory Psalms are those that call upon God to punish the wicked or to deal with one's enemies. And sometimes the unbelievers will accuse the Bible of being vindictive and uninspired because of imprecatory Psalms. But that isn't the case. And here's why. There are about a dozen reasons here. And if you were preaching on this, you would want to digest these and come up with 3 or 4 of the best ones, or combine them into 3 or 4 ideas. But this is not personal vendetta, which the Bible condemns. Leviticus 19:18, Romans 12:9. Number 2, this is a recognition of God's. I'm sorry, I got on the wrong tool there. God's justice and intolerance of sin, which we emphasize in the last part of verse 10. Then, number 3, the righteous will be rewarded and the wicked punished. That is an eternal principle or truth, precept, because God's going to do that whether I ask him to or not, because that's the way he set up. So we're just asking him to do what he said he would do. Jesus demonstrated this when he cursed Capernaum, Matthew 11:23 and 24. Paul prayed for anathema upon false teachers, Galatians 1:8 and 9. Now, this is the perfect example of Jesus, and he did this. This is an inspired apostle, and he did this. So it's not wrong for David to do it. We also see Paul also said of Alexander the coppersmith that he would face retribution, 2 Timothy 4:14. The martyrs under the altar in Revelation 6:10 sought justice. How long before they will be punished? And this is another way to state it. The Lord is the King of righteousness, just as he is the King of peace. You see, this falls into the righteousness aspect of his activities. And 2 more, those that obey not the gospel will face God's vengeance, 2 Thessalonians 1:7-9. That's true whether we ask for it or not, and we don't desire it. We want them to obey the gospel, but if they don't, then that's reality. And then the last one, we should have pity for the sinner, but we should not allow our pity for the sinner to become a condoning of his sin. We must hate sin. no matter if it's in someone that we love and we're close to, we still hate the sin. And therefore, the imprecatory Psalms are a little different approach to the righteousness of God, really. All right, that's all we'll say about Psalm 5. And I'm going to go teach my Matthew class, and then I'll come back in here. It's just an hour class this morning. So if you want to take a lunch break and or work on your sermon or whatever you want to do, and if you can come back, I'll finish this class. I guess it's 11 o'clock your time, so I'll come back in a little after 12, and we'll finish by 1 today. If that is it, can everybody do that? If not, then
Yes,
that's okay.
we're set to do that.
Yes, sir.
You're good. Am I good with
Yeah,
that?
we're set.
Okay. Well, let's take our break then, and I'll also have to get a charger for my computer, which is about to die. So I will try to do that. We'll see you in a little while.
All right.
Mr. Allen.
Thank you, brother.
You're welcome, brother.
And good morning, miss.
Good morning.
All right.
Good morning. Thank you, Alan.
You're welcome.
Don't forget to stop the recording.
So.